Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dawn Jeffries. I will be moderating this afternoon's conversation with President Sands. And before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that I am in my own home, in my own pod, and we'll take off my mask now and invite our guests to do the same while letting you know that they are all in their own private spaces or offices or homes joining us for this Zoom this afternoon. And again, as we've mentioned before, doing these, we put masks on as our default, just to remind folks to mask up and encourage you to do the same. Before I introduce our panelists, I just wanted to mention that we are recording this session, so it will be available for you to view after we wrap up. And now to introducing our guests, President Sands. As I mentioned, President Tim Sands. He is joined by Chris Wise, Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs, Chris Flynn, Executive Director of the Mental Health Initiatives, Laura Hungerford, Department Head for Population Health Sciences in the Virginia-Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine, and Ellie Sturgis, Director for the Cook Counseling Center. We will focus today on the mental health and well-being of our community. And before we leave today, I just want you to know that I will share a number of phone numbers for campus resources so that you have them as a part of this conversation and for ease of finding them should you need them. President Sands, if I can start with you to set the stage, so to speak. Virginia Tech has recognized the importance of mental health and well-being long before the pandemic impacted all of us. Can you talk about the university's efforts to focus on the community's needs?
Thank you, Dawn. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a really important conversation that we're having. I'm really pleased to be with my colleagues here. Yes, I think the mental health considerations, especially with respect to our students, but even more so in the past year or so, looking more broadly at our faculty and staff and employees, this has been a top consideration since I've been at Virginia Tech. I have a vivid memory of about 3 years ago hosting a gathering of academic leaders from the 15 ACC institutions. And in my conversation with them, I asked them by show of hands to identify the 3 biggest challenges that they faced. This was a group of I think about 50 or 60 people, all leaders at various levels in those 15 institutions, public and private. And there was one item where there was unanimous agreement, and that was around student mental health. So that was about 3 or 4 years ago. And pre-pandemic, before a lot of the issues that are in front of us right now. In the last 5 years before we convened the mental health task force, and I'll say a bit about that in a moment, the demands for mental health services at Virginia Tech had grown by about 30%, normalized to the size of the student body. So we were growing, but the demand for services was increasing at a rate that was really startling. It wasn't just at Virginia Tech, but it was around the country. And we had been adding resources to Cook Counseling every year, but they were really straining to keep up. And some of my colleagues here have direct experience with that. At the time, Provost Cyril Clark appointed a mental health task force, and that was during fall of 2018, to look at issues around our mental health services. And we're going to hear more about that in a moment. We have Chris Wise with us who chaired that task force, and 2 of our other panelists, Chris Flynn and Laura Hungerford, were members of the task force. So I'm not going to go through the charge and all that, but it was a very impactful conversation that has led to a series of findings and implementation strategies that we'll soon be hearing about in this discussion. But now we have the additional challenges of the pandemic, a racial reckoning, a recession, the national politics, and we have serious concerns and questions about the mental health and well-being of our students, faculty, and staff. And that's why this discussion is so timely.
Thank you, President Sands. Chris Wise, if I can turn to you and ask you to elaborate on what President Sands was just touching on. The university did this mental health report that came out in 2019. Can you give us sort of a brief summary of the findings and how that has really driven a number of the initiatives that we'll touch on today?
Yes, certainly, Dawn, and thank you for offering today's program. I think it's as President Sands said, it's a critical program, always, not only for this time, but always. But as President Sands mentioned, the provost put together a task force that I had the opportunity to chair, but it really brought together leaders from all over campus to have a conversation around what we had seen to that point here at Tech, what was going on nationally, and then some ideas about how we might move some of our work forward. And again, you mentioned Dr. Hungerford and Dr. Flynn were also on that panel, but some of the things that we learned kind of quickly were that the prevalence of mental health concerns is not just a college student thing. And quite frankly, it begins much earlier with 50% of mental health conditions happening before the age of 14 and 75% of those happening before the age of 24. And so immediately our task force realized that the typical age of our college students is in the sweet spot of where mental health concerns may manifest themselves. And it's important for us to understand that nationally, not just at Virginia Tech. As President Sands alluded to, we learned that the demand for mental health services was growing consistently here at Tech. It had doubled over the past decade, the demand of students requesting those services. And at the time of the task force, we did a study of the past 5 years, and that study showed that the number of students receiving services at Cook Counseling Center had increased by 43%, while enrollment had only increased by 9.5%. So that was telling to us around understanding the resources that we had been putting in and that we needed to put in going forward. But the interesting thing was that's not just unique to Virginia Tech, and actually nationally, during that same 5-year period, the numbers were 40% of students seeking services in their counseling centers and 10% enrollment growth. And so those were the years of 2013 through 17. Certainly a lot has happened since then that has probably increased those numbers even more so. It was also noted, and one of the important findings that we had was that mental health problems are indeed more frequent among those who have experienced prejudice or have experienced isolation. And if you think about those two things with some of the events since March, you will understand kind of where we're at today. Also, those who are experiencing financial stress or any other traumatic experiences, the mental health rates and problems are a little higher for those groups. And again, that clearly came out in our task force study. Also, the escalation of e-devices and social media, we learned is a big contributor, and that continues to be studied, actively right now. But we learned from our students. We had a lot of student interviews during our task force, and we learned from our students that some of those things were impactful in how they were living their daily lives. And we also learned things from students like specific findings related to wait times and the amount of appointment time from your initial assessment to maybe coming back for a follow-up appointment. We learned that many of our faculty, we interviewed our faculty and advisors, many of our faculty advisors and TAs did not feel prepared to adequately identify students that were in need and also to help those students find the right support. So what happens a lot is a lot of those students end up being referred to Cook Counseling, which again impacts that level of usage, which gets back into that wait time challenge. So those were some of the things. I mean, there were a lot more, and certainly on a positive note, we learned that Virginia Tech has consistently been on the optimal end of the recommended mental health staff ratio per students. I will admit that in my time in this position, our board, President Sands and the leadership team and our budget office has been committed to providing the resources to grow our mental health services even before the task force started. And so we were moving in a direction that we felt were pretty good, but the task force obviously showed us that maybe what we were doing was keeping up at where we were at as opposed to getting ahead of where we needed to be. And so we have kind of upped those resources even more since the task force report. And another positive is that we certainly learned that greater awareness of mental health programming and the services that are available are very helpful in early attention to symptoms for students and for all individuals, and also for early treatment and the importance of early treatment in the increased success of academically and socially functioning, and also increasing graduation and retention rates on campus. So those were some of the things that, I'll identify right now. There were certainly more. And, from that point, when you ask where we moved from there, we knew that we didn't want this task force to be something for people to read and sit on a shelf. And so we identified Dr. Hungerford and Dr. Flynn as two folks that we could ask to lead an implementation strategy, which has been underway now for a year and will continue over the next couple of years to try to make sure that the findings and the recommendations of the task force can enhance what we're doing here at Virginia Tech.
I'd like to get into more details about the specific findings and some of the resources and the changes made as a result. But Dr. Flynn, I wanted to get a little more background first, and if I can turn to you and ask about more of the goals of the task force. And Chris just told us that there were a number of people across campus who were part of the task force. And can you just give us an idea of who makes up that group for perspective on how decisions are reached going forward?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. So the task force was a smaller group of leadership from across campus. There were 6 or 7 of us, including student representatives from student government at the graduate and undergraduate level. So the task force has morphed into what we talk about as a mental health advisory group. And that group has met consistently over the past year to talk about how we look at the recommendations and implement those recommendations. And that group consisted of a variety of people from across campus, including student representatives. So student representatives from the Student Government Association were present. They have a health and wellness subcommittee. Between Chris Wise and Laura Hungerford and myself, we went out and met with lots of student groups in that first year. So the order of the gavel, student peer groups that have been represented on campus, we talked with them. So Hokie Wellness has an advisory group of all students focused on mental health work, and some of those students participated on the advisory group. We have faculty members from across campus, including from marriage and family therapy, from human development, from communications who are present, as well as the representation of Dr. Hungerford and some of her colleagues from population health. And then staff. I think the group that's really hungry for lots of information about working with students are all of the staff who have responsibilities for meeting with students and not necessarily haven't been trained with mental health backgrounds. So all of the advisors have been super involved. We've got representatives from the Virginia Tech Advisory Network who have been really responsive in seeking training. So that group met consistently on every 2 weeks through all of last academic year, and we were primed to begin a mental health awareness campaign. And all of a sudden in the spring, we got eclipsed by a pandemic, which didn't do much to help. But I think our students have done relatively well as we look at the numbers. We were able to do a couple of research studies. In February, we worked with Healthy Minds to look at students and how they were functioning. And that happened to be a couple of weeks before the pandemic hit. And then in April, late April, we were able to survey them again. So we have some information about that to guide our work. But the advisory group has been really good, and we are coming together to meet again this year and hope to launch a large public health campaign for the university. I think that President Sands said it correctly, that it is the whole university that's affected. And the more that we know about mental health ourselves and as a group, the more we can help each other and our students. I think John F. Kennedy has attributed this quote that a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think as we become aware of mental health concerns and ways to help students cope, it's going to help the entire university, including faculty and staff.
Thank you. And Dr. Hungerford, you are a part of this task force. You bring in an epidemiology perspective, which means really looking at the data, looking at trends, and as both Chris's, Dr. Flynn and Chris Wise mentioned earlier, talking about this not being specific just to Virginia Tech, but can you talk about what you're seeing now and how that influences Virginia Tech's response, particularly in the midst of COVID?
Well, one of the exciting things about being on the task force was finding all the types of data that we use at Virginia Tech. that allow us to, not just say, we're gonna have an initiative, we'll do these things, but to actually look at where we should target things, and then to also look at what's the effectiveness of what we're doing. How is it really helping students and faculty and staff? And so one of the things that we noticed when we started looking at the data was that we may think about mental health among college students as being something that emerges. They have more problems at this time because of transitions and stressors on campus. But as Chris Wise mentioned a little earlier, when we looked, we saw that actually the pattern was a little different. We saw that more and more students are reporting anxiety and depression in middle school and then into high school before they even come to university. So it actually looks like an increasing wave coming to the university, rather than that suddenly students come here and begin to have a lot more mental health problems. So even if we stayed the same with what we were doing here and doing effective things with students, the prevalence of mental health concerns is increasing in youth across the country, as Chris said. And so you can think about that coming to our doorsteps as an opportunity for us to really think about how we help students. And so our response needs to be ready for these new students when they come, as well as to continue support the students that are here. Now, as an epidemiologist, of course, I like to look at data. And so the survey data that Dr. Flynn mentioned, when we look at that, it actually looks like once students are here at Virginia Tech, the curve of students reporting anxiety and depression actually flattens and decreases a bit. And so this is really strong support for the peer-to-peer and faculty and counseling center support that they get here. All the things VT is doing now, but also the ability to scale these up further and base it on looking at what we're doing. I think the other thing that's really important is that this feeds into another focus of the initiative, and that's thinking about our students across their life course. So our students are here for only a few years, and we focus on the idea that they need to build knowledge and skills for their future careers. But I think universities need to think about how we help students prepare to tackle mental health challenges and to help those around them in their homes, in their workplaces, when they're friends, after they graduate. So this flattening of the curve, I think, suggests good possibilities for as we look forward and how they can carry those skills that they're learning into the future and into the rest of their lives.
Thank you. And I think that was exactly what President Sands was talking about, starting us off in Virginia Tech's focus on this early on. Feel free to chime in, anyone, if you would like, as I go on. But Chris Wise, I just wanted to ask you if you could talk about some of those things that you mentioned earlier, elaborate on those, the response to the needs that have been identified and ways that Virginia Tech is responding by adding resources and programming.
Absolutely, Dawn. And before I jump into that, I mean, just building off of what Dr. Hungerford said, I think a big thing that we'd like to do at Virginia Tech is not only provide the resources for students to be successful while they're here, but to continue to change society and help mental health resources be all of our responsibilities as we move forward, is a great learning opportunity for our students. And so it's one thing to step into the counseling center and get the kind of treatment that you might need to help you manage kind of what's on your plate while you're here. It's another thing to learn about ways that you have helped yourself and then help others use those ways to help themselves. And so I appreciate what Dr. Hungerford pointed out there. And I know our task force talked about that a lot. As far as some of the things that we have done to increase resources, and again, some of this goes back to prior to the task force, but since 2016, we've actually added the following to our counseling center. And some of these have been after the task force, but we've added 20 new full-time equivalent clinicians to our task force. We've added 2 additional wage clinicians, and that's to pick up additional hours that we need. And we have some quality folks in the area that just want to work on those wage style. But we've also understood the need that it's not just about counseling and just about responding in a treatment way, but also responding proactively. And so we've added a couple of what I think are key positions in our Hokie Wellness department, one related to mental health initiatives to do resiliency training workshops for our students, and another around financial well-being that just started in October. And so we're just launching programming around financial well-being and some software that will help all students, whether it's, freshmen entering into college, all the way through your time here and on into your days as an alumni, in ways that we can provide financial wellness support to our students, which again can be a contributor to mental health challenges folks may face. We've also added an outreach position this year that we plan to expand upon soon. We've also added facility space all over campus. We've moved a couple of places as we've hired this amount of people. We've opened a satellite office in Kent Square. We've doubled the size of that. We've now moved out of McComas and over into an area in special purpose housing while we await a brand new counseling center that will be a part of new construction over on the north side of campus. And so we've done quite a lot operationally over the last few years, but specifically, we were able to add psychiatry services this fall with the additional of 7 new psychiatry residents. And so our psychiatry services probably will be able to double as we continue to move through fall and spring semester. And also Dr. Flynn is leading a search group that's in the final stages of hiring 3 new counselors that will actually be embedded in 3 of our largest colleges. And again, some of the findings from the task force were understanding unique challenges that some students might have based on their academic program, and then also supporting our advisors and our faculty members in ways that they can provide support. Dr. Flynn mentioned the campaign that we're doing. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had an opportunity to visit with a student who might have wanted to question or learn more about our services, only to share some things with them and find out from them that, oh, I didn't even know that existed. And it's one thing not to have something, it's another thing to have it. And we haven't got the message out in the right way. And so that outreach coordinator and this campaign group that Dr. Flynn and Laura and myself are leading, hopefully will help people understand the variety of services we have. And then the last thing I'll mention right now is the additional peer support that we've tried to offer both through Hokie Wellness and through the Counseling Center and resource workshops. And again, the resiliency programming workshops that I mentioned. So it's important for us, and we may talk about this a little later, but it's certainly important for us to respond not only to the needs for treatment, but also to the preventative and educational needs that we can carry forward, that students can carry forward, and kind of help themselves when they need to, help their peers when they need to, and then also provide that treatment when they need it.
And Ellie, I wanted to bring you into our conversation to talk about the impact that the pandemic has had on our community. Have you been able, as Director of Cook Counseling, been able to assess that, to determine how COVID has impacted mental health? You got it. Just
Thanks, Dawn, for the question. Yes, we have. We continually gather data on our students. And one of the things that happened in the spring when we pivoted to a primarily telehealth model, the Center for Collegiate Mental Health looked at data from the beginning of the pandemic until the end of the academic year and looked at the symptom profile of students, both our students, and that allowed us to look at national norms. And nationally, what we have found is that student mental health didn't change that much pre-post-COVID, at least for that brief period of about 3 months. The only scores that really got elevated were increased academic distress and increased stress around family issues. And that makes sense because this was a new experience. Students were back at home, they were dealing with their families more, and they were dealing with a whole new academic platform. As students have come in this year, we've continued to gather data, and we're finding that our big causes for coming to therapy are still the same. It's problems with anxiety and depression, academic concerns, relationship concerns, and interpersonal difficulties. And that's the pattern we see pretty much every year. What we've done is looked at our scores on those scales this year and compared them to last year. And we're finding a slight elevation, although not statistically significant, but a slight elevation in all of those scales for our students. When we look and compare our students to national data, looking at the same time period, always before, Virginia Tech has looked a little more healthy than national norms. Our depression scores were a little lower. Our anxiety scores were a little bit lower. What we're finding is we're moving up to match the national norms. Nationally, the scores aren't elevating that much, but we're now matching the national norms rather than having a, quote, Virginia Tech protective feature on it. We also are asking students how COVID is impacting their lives and whether they're coming to counseling because of COVID or for some unique reasons. And about 50% say that their issues are somewhat COVID related, although they may have been going on ahead of time for COVID. And the primary ways that COVID seems to be affecting our students is more stress around academics, more stress resulting from loneliness and isolation, increased academic distress in general, just because I think many students find it somewhat challenging to continually do things on virtual platforms. But they also talk about distress coming from missed opportunities. There seems to be a grieving going on. And particularly right now, things aren't the way they used to be on campus, and some students are having some difficulties with that. The other thing that students are reporting is that they have increased financial concerns and concerns about family. So when they say they're coming for COVID, they may have been, or whether their visits are related to COVID, they may have the same symptom pattern they did before, but their distress from it, I think, is a little higher because of the impact of the pandemic.
And
That's really important information that Dr. Sturgis is presenting, and she's referring to students who come into counseling. So I mentioned a little bit before that when we look at the population level studies, which is where Healthy Minds is, Healthy Minds looked at first a sample we did in late February, early March, a sample of about 6,000 students who responded to the Healthy Minds survey. Then we did it again in late April, looking at where COVID was. And there was actually, and I want to say in general too, that in general, the increase in student demand or student distress isn't always a negative. It's sometimes a positive that these students and this generation of students who are coming to college have been taught to recognize symptoms of anxiety and symptoms of depression, and that those negative feelings or those emotions, they can label them as such, as opposed to in the old days when people thought they had something wrong with them physically or would go see their doctor or look for medication. They're much more aware. So the things, there's like some good news that has come out of the surveys from COVID, from Healthy Minds, which is a population era study. One thing that was surprised me is that more students reported spending more time after COVID studying 16 or more hours per week than they did beforehand. And so they were studying harder and more intensively. Alcohol use was down, interestingly, and I think that's because half of them moved home with their parents instead of being out with their peers. So that's not a bad thing. And interestingly, their satisfaction with their college experience went up from 18% who are very satisfied to 23%. So there was something about the university and faculty response that I think students recognize that people were really trying to do their best and trying to help them. That's not to minimize the stress that COVID has had on our students. Certainly there's been disruptions for all of us, right? I mean, when I hear Pope Francis yesterday, when he was talking about, when he released his encyclical, was talking about feeling caged by COVID. I think we've all felt caged. I think we all have some Zoom fatigue, and our students certainly have gone through that. But the good news part of that is non-suicidal self-injury is not increasing. Suicidal plans are not increasing. And to my knowledge, we haven't had an increase in students who have committed suicide. And always any one suicide is too much. So there is, I think that as Dr. Sturgis has talked about, she's looking at the clinical population, but if you look at the population level, our students are experiencing the same stress, our faculty and staff are, that the rest of the world is. But I think there's something about being in this together that has made it possible for our students to actually do some positive things and have some positive results that come out of it. I know we're all waiting for the end of COVID when we can get out and socialize together more and have our own Zoom fatigue being taken care of. But we're all in it together. And I think the fact that faculty and staff have recognized that has been important. One of the thing that students attributed their success academically and their satisfaction with Virginia Tech is the people that they feel that contributed the most to their success has been faculty members. It hasn't been staff and other people dedicated to it. It's been faculty. And I think that speaks a great deal to the way that the university has handled that in the student response. So I'm just trying to, it was just another perspective on top of what everything Dr. Sturgis said, I certainly agree with, but just another perspective at the population level across all of our students.
I appreciate that. And Dr. Sturgis, I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and this is for you or anyone, but a couple of questions out of what you were saying. Is there anything unique to Virginia Tech that makes it different from other communities? We've heard a lot today about what you're seeing being seen across other communities, but also Dr. Sturgis, you mentioned specifically Virginia Tech coming below the national average and that changing a little bit. And I'm curious if that speaks to something unique about our community or what would account for that?
I think our students love Virginia. Most of our students love Virginia Tech and feel supported by Virginia Tech and feel like we have their best interest at heart. Given our motto, Ut Prosim, our students look after each other and our students get involved in caring for each other and caring about each other. And I think that is a real protective feature. And I think most of the time we're happiest when we're serving others or making a difference in someone else's life. And the whole way we structure Virginia Tech is to be of service to one another and to be a support to one another. And I do think that makes it somewhat unique. I also feel that our students can see the emphasis the university is placing on well-being and see the continual addition of resources and studies looking at what's going on. And I think they have the feeling that students really care about them. During the spring, I was part of a program that contacted students and saw how they were doing when they were back at home. And most of them said they were doing pretty well. And thank you for reaching out. We didn't expect someone to call us just to see how we're feeling. I think at first when I introduced myself as being from the counseling center, they were like, whoa. But it wasn't anything to do with the counseling center. It was just what Virginia Tech was doing for its students. I think that attitude of caring is protective for our students.
Are there any new initiatives to help make sure that the university maintains adequate access to services moving forward?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do in addition to the embedded counselors is we have staff now, we have 12 staff that are working as liaisons to various offices on campus or various student groups. They work a couple of hours a week and we have students at the cultural centers. We have someone as a liaison in the Corps of Cadets, and this is new this year, someone working for with the vet center and trying to take us out of our offices out to students a little bit more. And I think, so that's one of the big initiatives I think we have this year. And we're also, as a counseling center and the rest of the university, really looking at issues of racial disruption and making sure we are trying to reach out to students that may be hurting, who may not feel comfortable reaching back, just coming in to see us. And so we're hosting a lot of online drop-in conversation support groups. We now have support groups for first-generation students, LGBTQ students, for students who identify as being people of color, We've got a support group for a new one that's starting with international students. So we're trying again to reach out. The other thing we have that's really been tremendously successful is our animal assisted therapy program. And the dogs are incredible ambassadors for Cook Counseling Center and reaching out to students. The dogs now are holding virtual office hours, but last year would hold office hours, and they would typically get 20 or 30 students coming during that hour and sitting in a circle and petting one of the dogs and beginning to talk to each other. Students that are very, very different from one another. We're beginning, and then the students started coming back every week. So it's almost like a natural group therapy support group that was going on. We're doing it virtually right now. We hope to be doing it back in person in the future, but I think the animal assisted therapy program has been a great boon for our students and for the staff.
And Dawn, if I can just maybe add one or two other unique things to that. I know Ellie's talking about some things that we have in place right now. We are also actively in student affairs moving towards making well-being an important part of the first year residential life experience, or the second year, third year, whatever it is. And so we are investigating the opportunity to provide potential counselors in residence halls and in the residential community, and certainly are bringing more of our health and well-being activities into the residential community. Now, again, COVID has disrupted that a little bit because many of those activities would be in person, and it's a struggle right now to move forward with that at the pace that we want to. But we certainly are exploring a couple of different initiatives that will hopefully start off of Virginia Tech students in residence, with well-being being a top priority and something that they'll learn from and grow with as they eventually first move onto campus.
I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, Chris, but I wanted to ask you to talk about the why behind that a little more, and the why of the focus on well-being, because that's really important and something that you have stressed before, and focusing not just on counseling and therapy, but overall well-being of our community.
So thank you, Dawn, for bringing that up. I do believe, and as part of moving into this role, one of the things that I really wanted to provide was the fact that well-being is more than just treatment, and it's more than, a lot of people think of well-being and their first instinct goes to exercise, and exercise is a huge benefit to well-being. There's no doubt about it, and I can talk more about that in a little bit, but the reality of it is well-being is more than just treatment. It's important for all of us to understand that we all can play a role and help in a student's well-being, whether that's a faculty member who becomes a mentor, or an advisor who becomes a mentor, whether that's a peer, whether that's looking out for each other. There's so much that can go into beginning to provide for a student who might need some support before that student says, I'm going to knock on the door of the counseling center and begin to get what we would potentially at that point call treatment. Now, that's not everyone. There are students are on a range of where they're at in their well-being, and some come here and counseling treatment is very important to them, and psychiatry treatment is very important to them. There's no doubt about that. But others can intercept, if I can use that word, themselves along a continuum before they actually get to a treatment place. And so what I hope that we can do is all recognize our role in well-being, and that counseling service is just one critical aspect of that. But there are other things. And here on our campus, Hokie Wellness provides any amount of programs that are related to an individual's well-being. Again, I talked about exercise. Exercise is medicine. That's not just a term. Folks feel better when they're active. And if folks have paid attention, recreational sports has started a Hokie movement campaign. And if you dig deep into that campaign, what it's about is all of us getting out and moving and being active. And if we're active, we certainly can begin to create some things in our brain that actually help us help with our overall well-being, and indeed the potential of helping with some of our mental health challenges that we may face at any given time. So our responsibility in the health and wellness area is to provide this information and provide some of this programming. But what I would encourage our community to do is to know the role that you can play in someone's overall well-being. And again, whether that's as a mentor, whether that's as a friend, whether that's as helping someone who's in distress yourself, or whether that's just being there and being engaged with people. And so we hope that our cultural community centers, our student engagement areas, again, our Hokie wellness areas, our faculty and advisors who deal with students every day can become part of each one of those students' own plan for their own well-being. And so that's the message that I would deliver around how well-being can be a function of everyone's responsibility if you figure out what is that one piece that I might can provide to a student or a colleague in need.
And we've heard today about counselors being embedded in some of the colleges. And I guess if you can talk about that collaboration, and Dr. Flynn or anyone that would like to address this, if you can talk about that collaboration and what's being done within the colleges to help with that effort.
Yeah, so we are looking to expand the embedded counselors. I think that as some of the audience may know, we have embedded counselors already in the College of Veterinary Medicine down on our Roanoke campus. We have full-time counselor in the Graduate Life Center, and we have counselors in athletics and down at the medical school. So the embedded part really helps for early recognition and also makes us part of the academic environment. And so I think people talk a lot about being in silos, but I think if we're going to break out of them, we really have to have collaboration between the people in the counseling center and the mental health field and the people in academics. And that has really worked out well. You know, Ellie talked some about the animal assisted therapy. Well, that originated in a partnership with the College of Veterinary Medicine. And now we've had 2 people over in the College of Veterinary Medicine to work with the students. And of course, the vet med students love the animal assisted therapy, so they're going to want to do that. So we want early intervention. We want to help faculty and staff recognize students who are in distress and help them get resources as soon as possible. And by embedding people and working with the academic departments, we're going to be able to help to train faculty and staff to recognize students in distress. So we've had a couple folks in Hokie Wellness and in the Cook Counseling Center go through particular trainings around mental health first aid. So we're working with human resources to develop a certificate program so that faculty and staff in the colleges can get training in mental health first aid, helping to recognize students in distress, making appropriate referrals, and just feeling comfortable acknowledging those concerns. We also offer a suicide prevention program called Question, Persuade, and Refer through Hokie Wellness and through Cook. And that program can be offered more broadly to faculty and staff. So we want I think Chris Wise has been talking for a long time about wellness and the intersection of that this is not just something for the Cook Counseling Center, but something that everybody wants to be involved in. And student involvement, I think we tend to forget about that, but there are over 20 groups on campus that work together to focus on student mental health, and Hokie Wellness brings them together once a month for they call themselves a mental health initiative as well. They're a terrific group of students. And interestingly, on the Healthy Mind study, when you ask students whether they think other students are involved in mental health, 85% of them, students, respond that there are students who are concerned about active mental health on campus and emotional wellness. So so we want students, we want advisors, we want faculty and staff to be involved in all of these efforts to promote wellness and to help students have access to services.
Thank you. You know, I wanted to ask each of you, I'm not sure if we're right at the halfway point in the middle of the semester or not, but this in particular, even without a pandemic, can be a really stressful time for students, for faculty, for staff. Can you offer some tips, some advice on what people should do if they are feeling stressed or anxious right now, particularly those who may not be comfortable reaching out?
Well, one of the things that I'd say, Dawn, right away is part of the mental health campaign is to reduce stigma on campus and that anxiety about reaching out. And we find that for most of the students on our campus, very few of them report having personal stigma about reaching out. That is, they would not think less of anyone who sought services. So we want to keep that low. We want students to know where services are and to be able to reach out. And about 90% of our students report knowing how to reach out for help on this campus. So that's a great thing. So sorry, I lost track of that thought when I was going through that. But we want students to seek help, and we want them to know where services are. And I think those things are really important. Ask me the rest of that question. I asked the rest of the group the rest of that.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to share some tips for working through what can be a stressful time. Just mid-semester, approaching midterms, the end of the semester, things like that.
One of the things that we find that's really, really important is sleep. The more students lose sleep, the worse their mental health is, the worse their concentration is. We really recommend that students work on making sleep a priority because it's essential. They also need to be eating well, and then exercise helps. If you can take care of those basic needs, then they've got the mental capacity and the energy to go on to their academic needs. But we really need to think basic needs, sleep, exercise, and food as just being fundamental. And many students will say, I don't have time. I don't have time to eat. I don't have time to exercise. I can't sleep at night because my homework's not done. So time management around learning to take care of yourself first and getting the studying done, I think is really important.
And Dawn, if I can just add a couple of things that I think is important. For one, I definitely think it's important for folks to reach out if they are feeling down this time of the semester and year. I think one thing that students will find is that there are others that are feeling the same way, and they're not in it alone. And oftentimes peers helping peers can really be beneficial to make it through what might be difficult times that are related to the time in the academic semester and some of those kinds of things. The other thing that I offer to a lot of students, and it's just something that has resonated with me for many years that I've been here now, and that's oftentimes we come to Virginia Tech or any institution and we want to experience new things, and that's part of that that part of college life. And I would never suggest that someone not look for those things. But sometimes you need to anchor to something that brings you joy. You need to anchor to something that's been a part of your past, especially when you're at a point where maybe things are getting stressful. And so I just oftentimes remind students that all of those things that you think I've done for the previous 18, 20, 22 years of my life that I want to do something different is a great strategy while you're here. But have a couple of them that are anchors that you can pull back to and bring you back to something that you've been. Because I think most of our students, if you've made it to Virginia Tech, you've had a great deal of success in your life. This is not an easy place to get to, and success here, success in getting here probably means that you certainly have the success to go beyond here. But I do think that people need to anchor to what has been successful for them when they're really struggling or when they feel a struggle coming on. And so I just offer that up as a piece of advice for any of our students and any of our community out there.
Just to build on that,
For all of us.
and just to build on a little bit, Dr. Sturgis mentioned our service dogs, Moose, Derek, Wagner, and Carson. And I think one of the things that we have as a unique support during COVID when we're working at home, at least I see a lot of them on Zoom, are other members of our family who may have fur or feathers or fins or other things like that. So students have that. The ones in their homes, the ones that they see when they're walking, or the ones they see on Zoom that can offer that same kind of companionship or a funny moment or something from their past that's been an important part of their life. So I think that piece can also help us, as well as our human companions.
We have less than 10 minutes to go, but with that, I would like to just ask each of you to give us any final thoughts, if there was anything that we may have missed or that you'd like to share, or if it's just tips for moving forward, not only for the remainder of this semester, but the academic year as well. Dr. Sturgis, would you like to start?
Sure, surely. I think it's important to put things in perspective, and it's important for students to give themselves grace. It's going to be hard to be at the very top of their game all the time, but to give themselves some grace so that they can calm down and move on. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got, and this is when I was learning to snow ski, and it was to bend to my knees and watch for trees. And what that meant was be flexible and be alert to your environment. And I think those are two skills right now that our students could use. Bend their knees, watch for trees. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Flynn?
I would go back to the issue that our students are a really capable, bright, hardworking group, and that when we think about, in some ways, we focus a lot on the disruption to our mental health, but mental wellness is a separate dimension. I think we all need to think about taking care of ourselves and what makes us happy. And, you know, Chris Wise was addressing this before. About half of our students that are seeing that we have been talking about through Healthy Minds or that come into the Cook Counseling Center, about half of them have received a diagnosis when either primarily before they even come to school, but then some of them will get a diagnosis while they're here. That doesn't mean that they're not functional and that they're not capable. Quite to the contrary, most of them have mild to moderate symptoms and they can remain functional. And I think the more that they can deal with it and get services and get a responsive work, the better the trajectory of their health. So we want to take care of them. We want them to get services, but we also want them to do the things that make them feel good and make them feel healthy. And that's part of where this mental wellness component will be as part of the campaign. We're going to be talking about what does it take to make people well. And I think as we become more comfortable and we know that we can function despite what anxiety or depression we might have, then we can look for positive outcomes. This group of students is no different than the group of students that I went to school with. I have two children in their 30s. I don't think students are any worse off than they were when I was younger. Trust me, I think they're much more resilient and thoughtful in many ways and capable. And so I just want to remind everyone of that there's a lot of hope and a lot of strength in this student group.
Thank you. Dr. Hungerford?
Thanks, Dawn. Through working on the task force and the initiative, I've been so impressed with the things that our students and our student groups have had to say. And so I think the really exciting thing about this initiative is that you've heard about all the resources that are being put in, but the biggest resources are the ideas our students are bringing and the things they're already doing in the ways that we can all work together as a community to do that. And especially in COVID, I think when people are feeling maybe isolated, but they can reach out in other ways, this gives them a great opportunity to continue to do that. And so, you know, please contact Dr. Flynn or myself or other people who are working on the initiative, Chris Wise, and with ideas and ways to help strengthen this and meet the needs of students in ways that we wouldn't even have thought of. And so I think it's an exciting time because this initiative exists to get students an opportunity to be even more involved.
Speaking of involved, Dr. Hungerford, I just wanted to mention and give a little bit of a shout out to your students, public health students who are out, really just a bright spot, seeing them downtown, handing out masks, handing out hand sanitizer, and just wanted to compliment your team of students for working on that. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about their passion for doing that.
So, you know, I have been so amazed with our students. You know, you know that they're wonderful, but then when something like this happens, you get to see it on a day-by-day basis. So I've also gotten to see them downtown and all the other things that they're doing. And I think that both our new undergraduate Bachelor of Science in Public Health students and our Master of Public Health students. You come to public health driven by a really wanting to help the community and the people around you. And so they have risen to that challenge, whether it's handing out things as the COVID crushers or the new flu fighters, because they're adding a flu vaccination component to it, or when they realize that in our community, there was a lot of concern and potentially spread of COVID among Spanish speaking members, and there weren't resources for them, pulling that together. So I think it's just an example of, I can brag about the MPH students and the public health students because I know them. But I think if you had almost any other faculty member here, they would be able to tell you those same kind of great stories about what their students are doing to respond to the epidemic. And you could see when we had the Tech Together Challenge, the amazing things that students across Virginia Tech came up with, from how do we space people on sidewalks to delivering food to just making new masks, all sorts of things. So I think it's maybe when we're amazed by our students, it's more because we get a chance to glimpse what they're doing, that they're doing all the time. So thanks for that opportunity to talk about them. It really it is a privilege to be at Virginia Tech and be with the students who have this attitude and do amazing things.
Thank you. Chris Wise, any final thoughts?
So I definitely want to build off of some things I said, but before I do that, I also want to thank Dr. Hungerford for her public health students. We have hired about 6 of those to help us in our testing center over in the stadium. And they have jumped in and been absolutely incredible. I just received an email this morning about the job a couple of them did at the walk-up clinic yesterday. And so again, it's been fascinating to see public health students jump into so many different areas. But Dr. Hungerford, there are some that are working closely in the testing center to help us provide the sample collections for all the COVID tests, and they are fabulous. I think my final thought is to kind of build off of some stuff that Dr. Flynn and Dr. Sturgis both said, and that is, well-being is definitely not a destination. I mean, you don't necessarily get there. It's ever evolving. It's every day, it's every moment, it's in all the activities we do, it's in all the interactions with people. All of it can and does contribute to well-being in some way, shape, or form. And so I just want to, my final thought, to reemphasize that there are so many things on this campus that students can get involved in that make them feel better. And feeling good is a start to all of this. And just if I can just shout out a couple of our areas, our Hokie Wellness team, the recovery community for our folks with alcohol and drug dependencies is an incredible place that provides well-being in a home for people to be successful. Some of the programs that our folks run that are about body image, sleep, the unwind offline programs, mindfulness, which 5 years ago was this thing, and now it's something that so many people practice every day. And so we can teach a lot of that through our Hokie Wellness program. We also have the Friends in Distress and Unwind Offline. And then, as I said earlier, the Hokie Movement programming and being active, and Rec Sports has done a tremendous job during the pandemic of even expanding our outdoor programs and offering these what they call green exercise programs. And the outdoors are a tremendous benefit to your well-being, whether you're in a pandemic or not. But certainly in this pandemic, they offer an opportunity for students to get out and kind of find themselves in nature. And they also have health coaching and exercises medicine, and they run a happiness group for students and faculty. So I just encourage all of our students to look as deep as you can, and we need to make sure that you know what's available to begin to put yourself in a good position with your well-being, but know that it's ever evolving and it's ever moving. And we all have those days and we all have those days. And we try to offer the programming that can get our students to where they need to be. But also, if there's other things, let us know. If there are things that we are missing, we want this to be a community that evolves around well-being. And yes, we have work to do. We'll always have work to do, but it's because it's not a stable target. So thank you, Dawn, for doing this. And, I'd also like to, again, just appreciate the support that the leadership at this institution has towards mental health. I do believe that in talking with my colleagues across the country that our leadership gets it. And, we just need to continue working on it and continue to evolve as much as we can.
I think that's a perfect transition to President Sands before we leave.
Well, as the only person who's not a wellness professional on this panel, I've been mainly listening and learning. And although I've heard many of the pieces of advice before in some form or another, having them delivered with such context has really been helpful to me. I think the bend your knees and watch for the trees that Dr. Sturgis offered was fantastic, as were many of the other comments that our panelists made. In the big picture, though, I think we have a very important feature of Virginia Tech, and also a responsibility, and that is our sense of community. It's really our community that makes us strong, and we are challenged in this virtual mode, especially in building relationships that weren't started in person, and that's something that makes the spring or the fall even more challenging than the spring. But I think that the one thing that I took away that I think was certainly one of the messages of the task force is that we have an opportunity while our students are with us in these 4 years or 5 years or whatever it may be, that they have an opportunity to build some skills that they can take with them. And I really like some of these programs that are around building those skills. You know, a lot of us have CPR training. It makes me think that all of us ought to finish our time at Virginia Tech, especially students and certainly faculty and staff, but our students especially, having built some skills around what we heard today as mental health first aid or the question, persuade, refer program. And that will make us stronger as a community, but I love the idea of our students leaving Virginia Tech with those skills so that they can be change agents and supporting catalysts for whatever communities they join in the future. So thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, President Sands. And I do want to pull up this screen that has numbers for resources for our viewers to be able to have access to, but wanted to make sure to thank all of you, our panelists, President Sands, Drs. Hungerford, Flynn, and Sturgis, as well as Christopher Wise. And thank you all for watching. I will share this with you. And of course, this is all on the VT website, but so you can see it here as well. We'll leave you this afternoon with a look at this. So thank you everyone for taking part, and reach out. Thank you.